Good evening. Would the members and our guests please take their seats? This meeting will now come to order. As all members have received a copy of the call for tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. Will everyone please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As all members have received a copy of the minutes of our October 23rd meeting, the reading of those minutes will be omitted. Are there any changes or amendments suggested to those minutes? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes as submitted stand adopted upon unanimous consent. Mary Ferry, Chair of District 5.
Good evening. Tonight, District 5 would like to thank Dr. James Ennis for his many years of town service. Jim was elected to RTM in 1976 and served for 30 years until his recent retirement. At various times, he was a member of the Education Committee, the original Cost Containment Committee, which became the Budget Overview Committee, and then was on the Public Works Committee, of which he was chairman for a number of years. In addition to his RTM service, Jim has been chairman of the Sidewalk Committee, which is now the Pedestrian Safety Committee, and has served on the Board of Ethics, the Community Development Committee, the Riverside Association Board, and 2 years on the Board of Education. He also enjoys reading to children at the Riverside Elementary School. All of this in addition to having had a full-time medical practice. Because of his wide-ranging experience and institutional memory, Jim has been a regular contributor to discussions at district meetings and at RTM. We wish him well in his retirement. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Richardson, Chair of our Special Committee on the Nathaniel Witherell, to be followed by Randall Huffman.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The Special Committee met on Thursday evening, November 30th. Our expectation at that time, or leading up to it, had been acting on the charter amendments proposed by the board relating to the formation of a building committee. That did not materialize, however, though they have been approved by the Board of Selectmen. Perhaps they will be on the January call. Nonetheless, the meeting was a useful one. David Ormsby and 5 other members of the Witherell Board were present, along with 2 members of the BET. Bill Kowalewski, Executive Director, made an excellent PowerPoint presentation of Project Renew Witherell, which is about an hour long and offers a great deal of information about the nursing home, as well as about the board's building and business plans. I understand that the Witherell team is trying to make a presentation to as many RTM districts as possible. And I would recommend that if you get the chance that you see it and get an electronic copy of the presentation for background and reference purposes as the board's plans and proposals are brought forth next year. As a result of the presentation, which includes a timeline, it is our understanding that in January the board will submit a revised business plan dealing with the building renovation construction proposal, for which a financing plan showing debt servicing capacity will be included. Then in February, the capital and financing requirements will be reviewed as part of the CIP process. And at our May budget meeting, we may expect a request for fiscal 2008 appropriations to finance the building committee's need for architectural and engineering design services, perhaps on the order of $3.7 million or 10%. However, not mentioned in the timeline or elsewhere in the presentation is the need to meet the first 3 of the 6 conditions precedent contained in this body's since the meeting resolution adopted in September 2004. Those conditions precedent require that the law department resolve any issues relating to the town's title to the land at 70 Parsons Road. Secondly, that charter changes necessary to facilitate the transition to future not-for-profit operation be proposed. And thirdly, that a not-for-profit corporation itself to own and operate the nursing home be incorporated now. 2 years have lapsed without action on these items, and time is getting short. Meanwhile, progress is being made operationally in terms of increasing efficiency flowing to the bottom line of Witherell in financial terms. Ray Augustine, who is Director of Financial Operations, has been doing an excellent job and, in fact, was named the Town Manager of the Year. And he reported that through October 31, that is for the first 4 months of the current fiscal year, the operating loss on an all-in enterprise basis was $261,000, which is about $656,000 better than budget. Revenues are up modestly, expenses are down, and possibly the net loss for the fiscal year will be about $750,000. That is progress. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, all best wishes and for a happy Hanukkah and a Merry Christmas from all the members of the Special Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Randall Huffman, Chair of our Budget Overview Committee.
Good evening. At its most recent regular meeting held on November 30th, the BOC elected a new vice chairman. He is Robert Lardon, our District 11 representative, who has been a long-term member of the BOC and former secretary, and we're pleased to have him now serving in the office of vice chairman. I stand before you this evening as well to give another in the series of brief updates on the charge made to the Budget Overview Committee with regard to the CIP process. We were called upon to act on behalf of the RTM to review and to suggest responses and structure with regard to how the RTM should give timely review to the projects that are contained in each year's CIP budget. As we stated before, we have organized our proposals around 3 principles to govern our relationship with the CIP committee. They are that there should be disclosure of proposed projects as early in the process as possible. There should be transparency of the process by which those are reviewed, scored, and ranked by the CIP committee with observation by and on behalf of the RTM. And there should be detailed early review of projects that should go then to the relevant RTM committees. To date, there has been this fall 1 public hearing on possible new projects, but we have as yet received no listing of those projects that have been proposed for inclusion in the next CIP beyond what was available in last year's budget. And we received no notice of actual scheduled meetings of the CIP committee or of their process of review and ranking to date. We have been advised as early as this, or as late as this evening, that we will soon be provided with a schedule for the meetings and that that process will proceed. So we urge you to be aware that it seems we may get a late start, but we will be urging all members of the RTM to look actively and as quickly as possible at proposed capital projects for inclusion in this next year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huffman. A reminder of the forum sponsored by Greenwich Audubon on environmental priorities, which is this week, Wednesday, from 8 to 9:15 in the Town Hall meeting room. And I received today an invitation to extend to all members of the RTM to attend the holiday concert to be held at Greenwich High School on Wednesday evening. That starts at 7:30. I'm told it lasts approximately 90 minutes and ends with Handel's Messiah. You should be getting an email from your district or committee leaders regarding that event. That comes from Jenny Kroeb, former Board of Ed chair, and Patrick Taylor, who's director of choirs at the high school. And once again, I would like to thank sincerely Jenny Larkin and Paul Curtis, who bring us the RTM meetings live as well as other town meetings. So thank you for doing it again tonight. Now, I was surprised to learn last week that many of our members are unaware that some people were telling me that they don't have cable and therefore didn't have access to the broadcast of the meetings. Well, it's true that if you don't have cable, you don't have access to the live broadcast. But apparently many are unaware that the recorded meetings, both RTM, selectmen, and all that are done are available on the town website. And it's easily found if you just go to the RTM homepage on the town website. You'll see right at the top there's a link to go to Channel 79. And all of the various meetings are listed by date, and you can watch them on your computer. All right, that brings us to the call for tonight's meeting. An overview of the tentative schedule. I notified all district and committee chairs that based on the reports received, I intended to designate 3 of our 7 items for our consent calendar. And I will shortly read what each is, but in summary, I will designate items 1, 3, and 4 for the consent calendar. I will suggest that we combine items 5 and 6 for voting purposes, and that we take up items 2 and 7 separately. With respect to item 2, which is the proposed charter change involving the town administrator position, there are speaker sign-up sheets, both as you enter the auditorium and up front. So I encourage those who would like to speak on that issue to put their name on the list. I do anticipate a motion to limit debate being offered regarding debate on item 2. So that now brings us to our consent calendar, and pursuant to our rules, I am designating the following items to be placed on the consent calendar, which means we will not receive committee reports and there will be no debate with respect to any items that remain on that consent calendar. The first is item number 1, which is the acceptance of $614,000 pursuant to the federal, pardon me? Oh, yes, big difference. That's only 2 zeros there, yeah. All right, the acceptance of $614 pursuant to the federal asset forfeiture program, and that money will go to the Greenwich Police Department. Item 3 is the appointment of Stephen Leparco to be a member of the Glenville School Building Committee. And item 4 is the appointment of Jane Arnone to be a member of the RTM Claims Committee with a term expiring at the end of the current RTM term. Pursuant to our rules, if there is an objection to the placement of any item on the consent calendar that is supported by 20 or more members, that item will be removed from the consent calendar. Is there any objection to items 1, 3, or 4 being placed on our consent calendar? Hearing none, will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, consent calendar, items 1, 3, and 4, and proceed to poll your delegation. It was also the consensus of those reporting that items 5 and 6 be combined for voting purposes. So at this point, I will suggest that we suspend the rules to combine items 5 and 6. Is there such a motion? It has been moved and seconded to suspend the rules to combine items 5 and 6 for voting purposes. The motion to suspend the rules is not debatable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of the motion to suspend the rules to combine items 5 and 6, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. Item 5 now comes before us. Ed Gomo, Town Administrator.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, item number 5, resolve that the Town of Greenwich hereby accepts a grant in the amount of $222,786 from the Connecticut Department of Homeland Security, said grant to be appropriated to account F-130 for Homeland Security grant.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 5 has been moved and seconded. Pam Frederick, Chair of our Finance Committee, with that report.
Okay. Mr. Moderator, fellow members, ladies and gentlemen, item 5 and 6 is to accept a grant for $222,786 for the fiscal year 2005 and $53,327 for fiscal year 2006. The item was presented to the Finance Committee on December 4th. It was explained that the two items reflect 2 separate years. That's why they were separate. The smaller amount in 2006 reflects the diminishing funding that's being provided to the states. 2004 is currently being spent, and these new grants will be spent upon receipt. Much of the funding is going towards equipment, primarily training. Examples of spending include a reverse 911 system, which will be explained, masks and filters, and also medical supplies, although that's on a limited basis given the shelf life. The largest percentage of the funding goes to the police department, with $88,000 of the $222,000 in 2005 and $35,000 of the $53,000 in 2006 going to the police. The balance goes to fire, gyms, the Department of Health, and DPW. The vote by the committee was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Greg Fruman with the Town Services report.
I love following Pam because I have absolutely nothing to add to that report. Town Services took this up. We voted 10-0-0, and Pam did a wonderful job, and I concur with everything she said.
Thank you. Discussion on item 5. Item 6 now comes before us. Mr. Gomo.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, item number 6, resolve that the Town of Greenwich hereby accepts the grant in the amount of $53,327 from the Connecticut Department of Homeland Security, said grant to be appropriated to account F-130 for Homeland Security grant.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 6 has been moved and seconded. Any further to add? All right. Nothing further on our committee reports. Discussion on item 6. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, combined items 5 and 6, and proceed to poll your delegation. That now brings us to the separate items. We will take up item 2 first. May we have that resolution? Ed Gomo, Town Administrator.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, item number 2. Resolve that Article 15 of the Town of Greenwich Charter be amended to include the following action. Section 217A, Town Administrator. And the resolution is as it is in your call this evening.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 2 has been moved and seconded. May I invite all of our committee chairs to the front, and you may decide among yourselves what order you'd like to go. Who would like to begin? Mr. Brady? Robert Brady, Chair of our Education Committee.
Let the record show that the committee chairmen are not good at their alphabet. The Education Committee met last Monday night in a joint meeting with all of the Monday night committees except Legislation and Rules, at which the First Selectman and explained the item, and others took questions on it. We then adjourned to our regular meeting space to discuss the item and to vote on it. The good news first, our vote was recommending this was 9 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstention. Generally, the committee believes that the amendment's language accomplishes the desire that was stated by the First Selectman, which is that the administrator position be filled by a professional. There is that requirement in the amendment. That the administrator serves at the pleasure of the First Selectman plus 1 other selectman, also in the language of the amendment. And, excuse me, and that the charter amendment itself embeds the position in the town charter, making it I think the expression used was a real position, again, to be filled by a professional. The concern expressed by the 2 people opposed to the item was that this might create a separate power base within the town government by an unelected official. The committee concluded in reading the language that this draft or this proposal did avoid that problem, and in addition to that, there was the incorporation in the explanos of the comment by the town law department that no authority was removed from the First Selectman, put it that way. That in fact, at all times, the First Selectman is in charge of the departments as indicated in 217A, and that this administrator position described in the amendment is effectively an assistant to that, acting on the authority of the First Selectman, and that in that respect, the elected authorities retain all responsibility and accountability. Those who were opposed to this were concerned that the position did create a non-elected position with authority over town departments. The person who abstained wanted more time to think about the issues. Again, our vote was 9 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstaining to recommend adoption of this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam Frederick with the Finance Committee report.
In order. Okay. Mr. Moderator, fellow members, ladies and gentlemen, the Finance Committee also met in the joint session, although we participated only as it related to changes from the October call. Those changes relate to Part B of the item, which adds in the language and makes the position subject to the supervision and control of the First Selectman. A second change was to specifically refer to Section 217A, of the Charter, which specifies the First Selectman's areas of supervision and control. The Finance Committee's vote has remained fairly consistent between April, October, and December. The last 2 votes being our official vote was 6-5 for this December item. It would have been 6-6. One member had other RTM business in the building and was unable to vote with us. In October, the vote was 8-4, so it's still fairly split, although the vote is more opposed going this round. So maybe you should have left it in October. Those in favor, I'm going to reflect my report hopefully equally because I think it's reflective of what the committee discussed. Those in favor supported the position given the increased size and complexity of the town and its budget. They liked having the permanence of a professional manager who was qualified in public policy and municipal management, who would then support what has historically been a first selectman who's experienced in the private sector. It was also felt that the position would provide continuity between administrations and assist in garnering greater authority and respect in town departments who could otherwise be non-responsive to short-term first selectmen. This, it was believed, helps to break down empires. It was also felt that having a permanent position would allow the town to attract higher caliber people to the position. While the position adds cost, it was also felt that savings would accrue from having a high caliber, experienced person in the position that can focus on the budget. Those opposed, on the other hand, felt that it was a question of that this position was a question of management style and did not want the position permanently placed in the charter. This includes those that thought the position should be proved out over the course of more than one administration. It was doubted that there would be continuity since it is an at-will position. Others questioned whether the town needed a COO to support a COO, particularly at the additional/incremental cost. The question of legality of the change was also raised and whether it met the Connecticut general statutes, although it wasn't clear during the meeting one way or the other for us. There was still concern that this transfers a substantial amount of power to a person who was not elected. In addition, there was a question of some of the comparable towns that have town administrators. We understood that some may be removing that role. Our vote was 6-6 unofficially if the other member had been present, and we believe reflects a clear split among the committee members. If approved this evening, this item would go to referendum for a vote by the citizens of Greenwich. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Colleen Jenkins with the report of our Appointments Committee.
The Appointments Committee voted 2 in favor and 9 against, with District 11 absent, and we very much miss District 11. The 2 members voting in favor worked on the premise that if we believe a town administrator improves the functioning of town government, then the position should become mandatory as a mandatory part of town government. Writing obviously this into the charter solidifies that position. Furthermore, the charter amended would stipulate that the new hire be a qualified in administration management, and this stipulation cuts out the possibility of the hiring of a political hack or similarly unqualified person. The 9 votes against the charter amendment fell into 2 basic categories. First, the position of town administrator already exists, and it's not part of the charter. The town of Greenwich, when offering competitive salaries, has the track record of attracting highly qualified people. Thus, the amendment is unnecessary. Furthermore, the delegate from District 8 had done research on town administrators nationwide and reported that the overwhelming number of towns that have town administrators do not have that position in their charters. The second category of no votes concern the concept of democracy. The position of town administrator gives exceptional power to a person who's not elected but is a member of a professional class. Thus, the TA has no responsibility to the public. The town administrator does not have to be moved by public pressure. This was a concern about a fundamental shift in the fundamental dynamics of government. Another member said this hybrid of first selectman and town administrator resembles a corporate model of chief executive officer, and a chief operating officer. And we're not a corporation yet. Furthermore, he pointed out that the first selectman that tends to come and go every 2, 4, 6 years, exceptionally 10 years, whereas the town administrator typically stays for longer periods of time. Thus, the TA, by remaining in place longer than an elected official, gains more power through the knowledge and the actual position. Another member of the Appointments Committee stated that concept in a simpler fashion. The town administrator starts out as a go-to man to get things done, and with time evolves into a got-to-go-to man to get things done. Finally, the point was made that there is no provision in the charter for the populace to remove the town administrator once the person's ensconced. Only one person, the first selectman, according to the charter amendment, has the power to recommend the removal of the town administrator. So in summary, the no votes saw the charter amendment at its worst a slide into a professional bureaucracy, or at its best, an unnecessary change in the status quo. Again, the vote was 2-9-0.
Thank you. Before we continue with the reports, let me give you the result of the votes that we have taken so far. The vote on the consent calendar, those were items 1, 3, and 4. Those in favor, 188. Opposed, 1. Abstaining, 0. The consent calendar items have passed. The combined items 5 and 6, which were the Homeland Security grants, those in favor 189, opposed 0, abstaining 0. Those items have carried. Jerry Isaacson, continuing with the committee reports on item 2, the
Thank you,
report
Mr.
of our
Moderator.
Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, Health and Human Services met jointly with the other Tuesday night committees and then adjourned to our own meeting space to discuss the issue. Those in favor cited several reasons for their decision. This charter addition would take the job out of politics as it has been in the past. The town would benefit from having a trained professional assisting the first selectman. There would be more continuity from administration to administration. Managing a $360 million enterprise requires a person with training and experience to act as an assistant or that chief operating officer who would report to the CEO and carry out the mandate of that CEO in day-to-day activities. Having the position in the charter would make it easier to find and hire competent people. Those opposed cited reasons. The position adds to the town's payroll expense. There would be a new layer of bureaucracy. The position need not be a charter change, leaving future first selectmen to continue it or to return to the administrative assistant or some other structure. Our vote was 8 in favor, 3 opposed. District 2 was absent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacson. Franklin Bloomer with the report of our Land Use Committee.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members of town meeting, the Land Use Committee participated in the joint meeting last Monday evening with the other most of the other Monday evening committees. I'll give you the vote up front. The vote was 8 in favor, 4 opposed with no abstentions. That was virtually identical to the vote that we took in October, which was 8-3-0, with one of the districts that voted negatively last Monday evening absent. Giving the majority position first, the majority views the objective of this charter change as bringing professionalism and continuity to the selectmen's level of town government, indeed requiring that professionalism be at that level, that there be a professional town administrator, and that the professionalism be as stated in the charter amendment. We have professionalism and continuity in town government at the level of the departments, but not at the top level. As a result, the departments can be, and frequently are, more independent than may be desirable. We presently have a town administrator, Ed Gomo, who meets the requirements of professionalism, but in the past the position has been filled by persons without that kind of professional background. Indeed, the position has been essentially a political appointment. First Selectman, of course, is not a professional, and each person elected as First Selectman has a learning curve to climb before he is fully effective, he or she, and even with experience, an elected First Selectman is still not a professional. There are many administrative functions that a professional is best qualified to handle. The 4 districts who voted against the item and their reasons are as follows. District 1 felt that the position of town administrator added another level of town government without reducing the compensation of the First Selectman. District 2 thought that the charter change created a position that would have more power than the First Selectman, but would not be answerable to the voters. District 9 felt that we don't need a charter change since we have a professional town administrator now, and District 12, who came last, agreed with all of the above. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, let me just remind anyone who might have walked in later that there are sign-up sheets when we get to discussion on this item. There is a speaker sign-up list up front. I believe there is still a list as you enter the auditorium, so I encourage anyone interested to get their name on that list. Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, we took up item 2 for what felt like the 37th time last Monday evening. Our committee chose not to join the other committees in a joint presentation. We were firmly convinced that we'd heard it all, and based on the remarks I've heard already, I think we were prophetic. We did hear from Wayne Fox, who explained that the revisions to paragraph B were accomplished by a group from the RTM, Mr. Gomo, and Town Council, and the revisions were designed to confirm that all the duties performed by the town administrator would not be in violation of statute and would be governed by the duties assigned to the selectmen pursuant to Section 217A. Our committee also heard from Alan Small, who again pointed out to our committee that it's his opinion that charter revisions may not be made in the way that this matter has come before us based on the 1975 referendum, which Mr. Small again pointed out operated to terminate the town's right to revise its charter by way of home rule. We also heard from Dr. Carlson from District 1, who stated that he believed that the town administrator's position as drafted in this resolution sets up a position that is more like a town manager rather than a town administrator, and he questioned whether the resolution as drafted was in legal order. We also made a revision to the amendment before you, or the subparagraph B, and at the appropriate time, Mr. Moderator, I'll bring that up. Our vote as to legal order with the amendment that we made was 7 in favor, 1 opposed with 4 abstentions. The 4 abstentions and the 1 opposition vote was cast because of the procedure by which this resolution came before us and in light of the arguments made by Mr. Small. We also took a vote as to the merits. Our vote was 9 in favor, 3 opposed.
Thank you. Karen Sadekhan, Chair of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and fellow members of the RTM. The Parks and Rec Committee met last Tuesday night in a joint session with all the Tuesday night committees. Selectman Jim Lash presented item number 2. You've heard reports from the other committees, so I would only like to emphasize 2 points that Mr. Lash made about having the town administrator in the town charter. It does 2 things. It makes the job of the town administrator a professional position, assuring that the job will be filled with a person experienced in town government. And secondly, it adds to effective transition from selectman to selectman. Mr. Lash emphasized that if the position is not in the town charter, the job is not a really permanent job and it will be harder to fill in the future. After his presentation, we left the joint session and reconvened as a committee. We reviewed the new language in the resolution this time. and after discussion, our opinions on the merits of the resolution were varied. But 2 points of view actually prevailed. One, those in favor agreed that it would be a good idea to institutionalize effective methods created in the last few years by Mr. Lash with the use of a town administrator. Those opposing the resolution expressed a fear of the town becoming more like a city if the town administrator position is incorporated into the charter. Our vote was 6-3-2. District 1 was absent. Districts 8, 9, and 12 voted against the resolution on the basis of my prior explanation. Districts 2 and 4 abstained on the basis that it's another step towards a city rather than a town style of government, and the comment that Ed Gomo is great, and he's not in the charter. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kavee, I'm sorry, Mr. Fruman? Bob Kavee, Chair of our Public Works Committee.
The RTM Public Works Committee met on Monday, December 4th, 2006, to consider item 2 on the call. Following the joint committee session, the Public Works adjourned to consider the item. Lively discussion on the item proceeded. Points were made in support and in opposition of the item. Support was related to an apparent need for establishing a position to bridge differing selectmen's proposed budgets and vision, and to provide a clear delegable authority to ensure town departmental response to the needs and direction from the town's top elected official. Those opposed pointed to the position being a liability in case of termination for anything but cause. The phrase "an employee at will" does not encompass the full legal intent of the authors, because at will can be challenged in many ways. However, it was said that inclusion of the phrase would be better than its omission. Some noted that there just was not a fundamental need for the position. Finally, the possibility of a pure patronage-style appointment was made. Remember, it's to be initiated and terminated by the first selectman. The committee voted 8 in favor and 4 opposed. Districts 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, and 11 in favor, and 1, 7, 9, and 12 opposed. I will speak to the item during the regular discussion.
Did you sign up on the list?
Yes, I did.
Good. Greg Fruman, Chair of our Town Services Committee.
Town Services met with all the other committees on Tuesday night to discuss this item. Every point I was going to bring up has been made. Quickly, we approved this item 7-3-0 with Districts 7, 9, and 12 voting against the item, and Districts 10 and 12 absent. The arguments for and against this item were very much the same as the arguments for and against this item last time it was brought to us. Those in favor in the past were more so in favor with the new modified language. Those opposed to the item were still opposed, and no change in the language would make any difference. That's essentially it.
Thank you. Peter Berg with our Transportation Committee report.
Good evening. Mr. DeMarco is out of town this evening. The Transportation Committee met with the Tuesday committees. Our first selectman spoke in favor of the charter change. He listed 2 benefits of putting the town administrator position in the charter. Number 1, it makes filling the position mandatory. Number 2, it sends a message to applicants that, for the position that the job is permanent. Numerous questions from those present about the value of these benefits. What if a future first selectman doesn't want a town administrator? And of what value is a permanent position if he can be fired at will? In response to the first question, Mr. Lash said if a future first selectman doesn't want a town administrator, he or she would need to propose another charter change. The Transportation Committee met by itself and continued to discuss these questions. Mr. Gomo joined us briefly to answer questions. He clarified that as proposed, unlike a department head, the town administrator position will be at will. He can be fired without the protection of a union. He explained that this is common practice for the town administrator profession. The Transportation Committee voted on this item 7 in favor, 2 against. Districts 3, 10, and 11 were absent. The representative from District 4 voted against it, saying he saw no solid reason for the town administrator, as all the previous first selectmen had done without one. District 6 saw this as an unnecessary waste of taxpayer money for another layer of government, and questioned how the money for the town administrator position was found so easily and whether it would have been returned to the general fund if not used. Thank you.
Thank you. Randall Huffman with the report of our Budget Overview Committee.
The Budget Overview Committee considered this item again at its meeting on November 30th. The proposed charter change in its newest rendition proposes to add to the town charter the requirement that the town employ a town administrator who is qualified and experienced in town administration and who will be paid a salary commensurate with his experience. This significant change in the form of town government is one of a series of piecemeal changes that have been brought before the RTM in past months. Never throughout the process has there been an open, thorough discussion of the total scope of these changes, which are in sum creating a more centralized, directed form of town government. Many residents of town may feel this is a good idea. But with this series of changes, we are now aboard a boat that is sailing into uncharted waters. This series of changes does not follow our town history of governance, nor does it follow any model of governance that has been provided to us as an example. What this change will do is to mandate a salaried position and a form of governmental organization that will be difficult to undo. If we later discover unintended negative consequences of this decision, and some have been suggested here from other committee reports, or if the town elects a future first selectman who wants to be active, present, and in charge directly without the intervention of an administrator, then we will have mandated a sixth finger on the hand of government, unnecessary, expensive, and only excised by surgery. There is general consensus that the current town administrator, Mr. Gomo, has done and is doing an excellent job. He has shown us the benefit of a qualified person in such a position. Remember, however, that the current town administrator exists and performs his duties without a charter provision. He serves at the pleasure of the Board of Selectmen. If you approve this change, that will no longer be the situation. We will have a mandated position of town administrator. The BOC voted 1 in favor, 9 opposed, no abstentions with 2 districts absent, and the one vote in favor indicated that she was, in fact, very close to undecided. Thank you.
Thank you. That now brings us to discussion of item 2. The results of our sign-up list is that we have 15 individuals who have indicated a desire to speak. Oh, you had an amendment. Yes, Mr. Wells, on behalf of the Legislative and Rules Committee.
In subparagraph B, which is on page 2 of the call, the last subsection, which is III, the last line begins with the word duties. Mr. Bergwager of District 8 moved, and our committee passed an amendment to include the following words. After the word duties, the words are of the first selectman. So paragraphs III would read, performance of such other duties of the first selectman as may be assigned by the first selectman. Our vote on that amendment was 10-1-1.
Thank you. Because that is an amendment offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. We can adopt amendments upon unanimous consent. Is there any objection to that proposed amendment offered by our Legislative and Rules Committee? Hearing none and absent objection, that motion to amend is adopted upon unanimous consent. All right. With respect to discussion on this item, I see we had 2 more names added to our list. So we're now up to 17 speakers who have signed up. With that in mind, we will hear a motion to limit debate offered by Mr. Tudhill, Chair of District 3.
Mr. Moderator, I move the usual motion, which is that debate be limited on this specific item, item 2, to 3 minutes maximum. That doesn't mean we have to use 3 minutes per speaker, per motion. And that the principal proponent and principal opponent, to be designated by the moderator, be given a maximum, absolute maximum of 10 minutes. Thank you.
I don't think they like that 10-minute part. Yes.
Okay, we'll compromise. Instead of 1 and 3, they said, okay, well, it's 5 minutes per principal proponent and opponent. Thank you.
It has been moved and seconded to limit debate on item 2 as follows. All speakers will be allowed 3 minutes per motion on item 2, with the exception that if there is an amendment offered, the principal, the proponent of any amendment and the principal opponent would be, the latter to be determined by the moderator, would be allowed up to 5 minutes on those motions to amend. The motion to limit debate is not debatable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of limiting speakers essentially to 3 minutes on this item, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That motion has carried. All right. We will begin with Angela Highland, District 7, to be followed by Janet Lockton of District 7.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and fellow members of the RTM. I will be brief. There are 2 basic forms of municipal governance. One is commonly called the mayor form of government. There you have an elected full-time chief executive. All powers and duties are vested in that person. The other form of government is called a city manager, or town administrator in this case. And in that case, it's a professional appointed position. In the instances where you have a city manager / town administrator form of government, the chief executive, mayor, or in this case first selectman, is actually usually a part-time ceremonial position. So you have one or the other. In my reading of this amendment would not only bifurcate duties, but if we approve this, I believe we're changing our form of government here. So not only are we changing the form of government, but we're changing it to some sort of hybrid that I don't see existing anywhere else in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Janet Lockton, to be followed by Dr. Carlson of District 1.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM. When the committee was formed, I emailed Jim Lash, Darayan's town charter, so he might take a look at that in order that we can come up with something that's agreeable to everybody. And I didn't hear back from him. But in Darien, the town administrator's duties are defined as he may. He is directly under the control of the first selectman. The administrative officer shall perform such duties as the Board of Selectmen may from time to time determine. These duties may include administrative and supervisory responsibilities and within the authority of the Board of Selectmen. Now, the important key here, if you look in Section B, no matter if it's under the control and the authority of the First Selectman, in Section B of the proposed language, it says that the responsibilities, he shall be responsible, not may be responsible for the day-to-day operations of the town. He shall be. That is a mandate. Anytime you see the word shall, it's a mandate. If it said he may be responsible, under the direction of the first selectman, that is a completely different story. So I think the language is actually confused because he said he's under the subject and supervision, and yet he shall run the town. There's no doubt about that. Secondly, I think that the compensation is set by the first selectman, the Board of Selectmen. I'm not too sure. I know there is no other job description in our charter where the compensation is set by the Board of Selectmen. I'm curious as to why it's not an MC position in the future, as it has been in the past. Right now, if you look at the Town of Greenwich official website, you'll see that there is a definition for a town administrator. We have a town administrator right now. And his definition is, right now, he shall review all budgets and make revisions where necessary, develop goals and objectives for spending for all town agencies, develop long-range spending for all town agencies, develop long-range capital improvement plan, submit budgets to the BET, represent the town in collective bargaining, and shall prioritize town needs. And yet he shall not have day-to-day control of the departments under the supervision of the first selectman. So I think that we really have to think carefully. The language is not as permissive as it should be. In fact, it is a mandate that our administrator in the future, if this proposal is accepted, would be a mandate and an obligation that he has to do that duty. And lastly, I don't know where my 3 minutes are, is that this has to go to referendum, and I don't see in the call that it is mentioned that it does go to referendum. So I think that that should be corrected.
Well, it does go to referendum.
Yes, thank you. Last time it said it would go to referendum on the call, and this time it didn't.
And it requires a majority vote of the membership of the RTM, which is 115 affirmative votes.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the RTM.
Thank you. Dr. Carlson, to be followed by Alan Small of District 10.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members of the RTM, public opinion has been a powerful tool in preventing mistakes by the Board of Selectmen, in particular the first selectman. Making the town administrator a charter position, in my opinion, will blunt this tool. You really don't know who has the power, and one of the people who has the power is not a person who is directly responsible to the people. I would like to suggest to you that it is a mistake to make a small step away from democracy by bringing this town administrator into the charter. If you leave it as it is, we have all the benefits of a working administrator, but he does not have that legal authority. So in the final legal analysis, he's no more than the assistant of the first selectman with a bigger salary and more duties. It would be very ironic that we who have the best form of democratic government step away from this at a time when the President of the United States is trying to sell to the world, especially the Near Eastern world, that democracy is the preferred form of government by rational people. I think we should do everything we possibly can to strengthen our democratic institutions in this country. Don't worry about personalities. Make sure the institutional structure is very strong and pure in the direction of democracy. I would also like to point out that this hybrid that has been put before us is much like a town manager. And in the situation of a town manager, the statute book says the Board of Finance nominates and decides on the salary. I think that is a mistake in the structure that the Board of Selectmen set the salary. That should be our BET. And I would also point out that it would be very necessary to have a second mechanism besides the first selectman for the removal of the town administrator, because he's got an awful lot of power. So that any charter change that you have for this really should have a mechanism by which perhaps the RTM by 3/4 vote could remove the town administrator. These kind of emergency things are very much needed in any form of democratic government to make sure the thing works well. Thank you.
Mr. Small, to be followed by Mr. Von Kaiserling of District 8.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen of the RTM, as you know, we went through this issue quite well when several charter amendment items were brought up a few months ago, and I'm opposed to this charter amendment for the town administrator. I'm going to try to only discuss new information, so we won't be rehashing some of what was discussed before. But something that is new that you may be interested in is we now have 3 legal opinions related to charter amendment that have been released under freedom of information to the public, that I'll be placing on the record of the RTM this evening so anyone can review them. And at the meetings that were held back several months ago, the town attorney said he agreed with all of those, which I thought was very interesting, because one from 2003 of John Wetmore recommended that the town seek another validating act. The town attorney also stated he basically based his entire opinion that this was in legal order on the Validating Act of 1975, providing the town the ability to do what it wanted in the future, to continue to use its home rule. I placed onto the record Office of Legislative Research reports, the basic definition of what a validating or a curative act is, as well as experience of some of our legislators who have stated directly that validating acts can't go into the future. They can't, in an unlimited manner, validate things that are unknown. And another interesting statement by our town attorney was a warning to this RTM that if we recommended the use of a Charter Revision Commission, that we would have to use that from now on into the future. I scratched my head a little bit and I said, that's interesting. So he agrees that if we use it now, that would negate the town's home rule ability. And interestingly, in 2003, then Town Attorney Wetmore was quoted in Greenwich Magazine as saying the same thing. And what I don't understand, and what many of you may not understand, is what difference does it make whether we did it in 1975, as I've documented that we have, or we did it in 2003 or 2006, as long as it came after the Validating Act. And I believe that what we've documented is that the town did use a Charter Revision Commission, that this process is flawed, and that the Charter Revision Commission should be used again for future and this charter amendment. And I'll place these documents if anyone would like to read them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Von Kaiserling, to be followed by Peter Basilewski of District 8.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. First of all, there's a lot been said. The committee reports are pretty exhaustive, so I'll try not to dwell on those. It is one certain point that was brought to us from some of the members, one of the members of my district who is in the Association of County Association of the United States, the nation, and looked into these position of town administrators, and apparently common practice, generally speaking, is not to have it in the charter or the incorporating papers of the municipality. So this would be a breach from the general nationwide practice. I think that we have some things that there have been a lot of claims about this position needing to be in the charter, which have more to do with the value of the job than being placed in the charter. And I wish we would focus on that specifically. I would hope that you read this very carefully, because the wording is such in a very clever way that if someone wishes to, they can interpret in various ways to their own benefit. People have thought there's some satisfaction and some comfort in the fact that there are qualifications in the charter for this job, that it will keep a standard of professionalism. In fact, if you read that first paragraph there, where it has the qualifications in A, it says the administrator shall be qualified in the administration and management of town or city government as evidenced by his or her experience in education. That's a very wide thing. In fact, the definition for this job's experience and qualifications is in your job description that's created by the HR department. Now, I remind you that the HR department, just recently by this austere body, was put under the direct control of the first selectman. This is the HR department of the First Selectman which managed to work towards the eviction of the commissioner of an independent board just this last year. So I look at the real politics of the matter, and I warn you that when you put all these powers together, it ain't what it looks to be. Mr. Lash, last Tuesday night, after questioning in the joint meeting, admitted that this is a politically appointed position. This is not a government job. This is a politically appointed position, was responsible directly to the First Selectman. If you have a problem with the town administrator, the First Selectman is the one you have to go to. You don't go to the administrator. Now, that works both ways, because when you have that kind of a situation, remember, he's the one who does the salary and performance review for the town administrator, makes the recommendations, and provides the structure that keeps his employment. The Board of Selectmen does
30 seconds.
The Board of Selectmen does not hire and fire him. They can only do it on the recommendation of the First Selectman. He also may become a czar, super czar, because he's an untouchable. He's the go-to person. He does the personnel organization for the First Selectmen's departments, and he creates the Selectmen's budget. He has the power of the purse string over all the departments. Who's going to fight with him? So I would lastly remind you that while there were 8 committees in favor, 2 committees against, and 1 split, the voting members, when you tallied up, were 71 in favor, 50 against, and 6 abstaining. That's not so strong as you would think for something that's as important as this. Thank you.
Peter Basilewski, to be followed by Bob Larden, District 11.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members of the RTM and guests, my name is Peter Basilewski, and I'm District 8 member, and I rise to support item 2 as amended. This item has been before this body on several prior occasions and has been debated extensively. I think you've all heard the principal objections, so I'm not going to repeat them, and they've been ably defended or responded to by our First Selectman and others at several meetings, etc. I would like to address a point which has been mentioned, but which I believe bears repeating and is at the heart of the reason why we need this charter change. I believe that the critical language in the proposed charter change, and why in fact we need a charter change, are the words, there shall be a town administrator, the town administrator shall be qualified in the administration and management of town or city government, as evidenced by his or her experience and education. The appointment is not discretionary, it is mandated. Furthermore, the individual must meet certain fundamental criteria. Now, I don't think it's appropriate to put job descriptions in a charter, but nevertheless, the general criteria are there, that the person has to be qualified in the administration and management of town or city government. I believe that the First Selectman, to his credit, is proposing something that will extend beyond his term in office, or that of Ed Gomo's term, which will unfortunately end soon, and instead responds to a fundamental change in our community. Those longtime residents of Greenwich who oppose this initiative, I believe, yearn for a form of government which worked well when this community was smaller, multi-generational in nature, when people knew each other on a first-name basis, when they had attended public school together, when their children and grandchildren settled in town, when matters could be resolved by simple debate among neighbors, and the electorate was able to interact face-to-face with town administrators. In fact, the RTM is a noble direct descendant of that form of government. Our town has changed since then, however. Like it or not, our town is now a global financial center. While the permanent number of residents has remained about the same at around 65,000, the fact is that I'm told that as many as 100,000 people may commute to town each day, leading to some well-known problems, traffic among them. Our real estate prices have skyrocketed, making it prohibitively expensive for our children and town employees to settle here or for our seniors to remain here. This has all led to a number of significant changes and problems.
30 seconds.
Our electorate is by and large increasingly composed of affluent newcomers who are well educated and are used to and expect the best in services from government. The personal bonds among neighbors that have characterized earlier, simpler times are not as strong, and the demands on government have increased. For example, today we've approved 2 appropriations which relate to our town's responses to terrorism. The world has intruded on Greenwich. We have a multi-million-dollar budget which will extend for 10 or longer years, which requires planning on a scale never before attempted in town.
Thank you.
This requires professional management.
Bob Larden, to be followed by Karen Fossiliotis of District 7.
Hi, I'm Bob Lardon. I'm serving my third term as a District 11 representative, and recently was elected Vice Chairman of the Budget Overview Committee to replace Fred DeCaro, who, if I may have the opportunity, Mr. Moderator, I'd like to ask the RTM to join me in thanking Fred for the tremendous job he's done on the BOC over these many years. I might add, Fred will remain as an alternate to the BOC, so we'll still be able to be the beneficiaries of his sound advice. I'd like to add just a couple of things to Randy's comments so that it's not misinterpreted that the BOC in toto is against the notion of a town administrator. And in fact, some of us, like myself, feel that a town administrator can and should provide a valuable function in a town that is growing ever more complex with an expanding budget. Randy spoke to several reasons for not approving a change to our charter codifying this position of town administrator. One of these, and principal among them, was that such a position would be a move to a more centralized form of government that would be in conflict with the decentralized form that the town of Greenwich has enjoyed for these many past years. And although I can appreciate this sentiment, I, for one, do not feel that a town administrator necessarily results in a more centralized form of government if, and that's a big if the role description provides that the position be accountable not only to the first selectman, but also to you, the members of the RTM. Rather, a revised position description might specify that the town administrator would be required to report to the RTM at its December or January meeting, for example, an operational assessment of the town for the calendar year. This would include answering questions from members of the RTM. In this way, the town administrator would have some accountability to the RTM that would help ensure the position would not overstep the bounds of our cherished decentralized government. And as Dr. Carlson proposed, the RTM should have responsibility to remove the town administrator. As far as I'm aware, the current position description of town administrator does not include these or other similar safeguards. This brings me to a related point. I do not believe the position description of town administrator was fully vetted by the RTM through its various committees. For one, the BOC was not included in the drafting or review of the position description. Clearly, this position has a relationship to the BOC as relates to our operational responsibility as quoted from the appendix to the rules of the RTM. I quote,
30 seconds.
The BOC studies and reports to the RTM any potential improvements in departmental organization or methods of operation, working cooperatively whenever possible with town departments. End of quote. If the town's administrator's position description had been vetted by the BOC, such safeguards as the ones I mentioned above might have been, if not included, at least discussed, not to mention the many other suggestions I'm certain you would have come up with in your own committees. Because of this, and at this time, I cannot support the codification of this position as currently proposed, but might well do so in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Fasiliotis, to be followed by Robert Kavee of District 12.
Good evening. My name is Karen Fasiliotis. I'm from District 7. Before I proceed, I just wanted to tell you that my mother, Des Fasiliotis, is a representative from District 11, and she admonished me not to be totally negative in what I say. So I'll try my best to present you a balanced argument as to why we should not approve the charter change for creating a position for the town administrator, and I will try to be a little bit persuasive to hopefully change the minds of those who would vote yes. So first, the positives. We've had an unofficial town administrator for a few years. By all accounts, the individual is doing a stand-up job. The first selectman has argued before various RTM committees that the position, as a charter change, will benefit the town in the following ways, and I am paraphrasing. It will improve the function of government, and the only way this can be a certainty is to make it a mandatory part of government. By making this charter change, the town is telling future applicants that if you do good work, you can be assured you'll continue in the job. It requires a professional person with city management experience that survives from administration to administration and provides continuity and a smooth transition. The first selectman's position is an elected position. Having someone with city management experience will give the first selectman someone to tell him or her what to think about in deciding some administrative function. It will also free up the first selectman to focus on policy issues. Well, these are compelling reasons to support the charter change, but there are some flaws in the argument, so here are the negatives. Sorry, Ma. First, I don't understand the argument that this position would create continuity. There is nothing to suggest in this charter change or the language of the amendment that it would do so. This is an at-will position. Anyone who has held a corporation knows that an at-will position is not a permanent position by any means. Second, and possibly the most important reason, as we've already heard from my colleague Janet Laughlin, the language of this charter amendment contains the word shall in subsection B. The word shall in legal and regulatory terms is mandatory. By approving the amendment as written, we are indeed creating a position with the same authority of the first selectman. The only catch is that the town administrator would not be an elected position. So we would, in effect, be creating a second first selectman that has the same authority as the first selectman, who is not elected and who reports to the first selectman. Third, if our first selectman is so overworked, which I've been hearing in all of these committees, or does not have enough knowledge to run the day-to-day operations of our town, maybe it's time for us to look at our town government as a whole, as it's structured, rather than to haphazardly amend the charter to create additional layers of bureaucracy.
30 seconds.
For example, we could create a full-time second selectman who's elected to run the day-to-day operations and then assist the first selectman, who would then be free to set policy. Just a thought. I could go on with more arguments as to why this charter change is not a good idea. I'm limited in time. I hope I persuaded you to at least think carefully before you vote on this item and to come to the same conclusion I have to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kavee, to be followed by Todd Ladonia of District 8.
That document had nothing to do with this item. The police commissioner asked me to end at the D. I'm disturbed that the proposed town administrator charter resolution purports to be something that it is not. The proposed procedure for selection and dismissal of a town administrator appears to be a Board of Selectmen decision, when in reality these decisions will almost certainly be determined by the chief executive of the town, who will initiate these actions. Historically, it has been a rare occurrence when the first selectman did not exercise full control over the three-man Board of Selectmen. The town administrator obviously must have a strong, positive working relationship with the first selectman. This charter amendment will almost certainly eventually result in some future lame duck, end-of-term town administrator appointment. This would leave the successor chief executive with the awkward position of disposing, at some expense to the town, with an individual who is both not of his choosing nor capable of contributing to the continuity the resolution seeks. The town's past experience with terminating employees, whether at will or not, has been challenging and expensive. 3 years ago, at the onset of the current administration, the concept of continuity was soundly rejected with the demise of the predecessor's plan to place the police administration facility at the old armory. We do not have a multi-year budget for our town. We have a proposed budget which reflects the vision of the incumbent first selectman, and that's the CIP. It's been said that this charter change is necessary in order for the town administrator to comply with state statutes. We may conclude that our in-place town administrator, despite admirable performance during the past 3 years, is illegitimate.
Todd Ladonia, to be followed by Jeb Beckwith of District 8.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, Todd Ladonia, District 8. I've heard my entire life the story Mr. Vasilevsky gives us that Greenwich is a town of transients. It is true that the most difficult home you buy here is your first, and that is the key. Many homes purchased in this town are purchased by town residents upgrading and staying here, because most people don't want to leave once they get here. This position of town administrator being codified in our town charter highlights what is becoming endemic in our town. We continue to hear that the town is larger and more complex. I put to you, it is our government that is becoming more and more complex, but truly not the size of our town. The size of our town has not changed dramatically in my lifetime. When I was in high school, I believe our population was approximately 60,000 people. Now, 35 years later, I think we're at 67,000. The size of our government has grown and continues to grow in geometric proportions. Let's stop it here. We can keep our town administrator, but let's stop the mandated growth of our town government by voting down this charter change.
Mr. Beckwith, to be followed by Paul Curtis, District 9.
Hi, Jed Beckwith. I won't take nearly my 3 minutes here. I've heard both sides of the issues. The one thing that I haven't heard, though, is that I haven't heard anybody say we don't need a town administrator. I hear a lot of people say that we don't need a town administrator ensconced permanently. And I guess where I come down on this is if, God forbid, Ed Gomo was replaced by somebody we didn't like, my understanding now is that Ed Gomo's position is a civil servant position. If we pass this charter change, it would be an at-will position. It seems to me that getting rid of an at-will person, if we had to, is a whole lot easier than getting rid of a civil servant. And through the moderator, if the town attorney is around, I'd like, just like that, that discussion to be held. I'd like to know from the town attorney what the process would be if we had to get rid of a town administrator, a civil servant versus a nominated official here.
So your question is, if we adopt this proposed amendment, would it be easier to terminate an individual in that position than it is currently?
That's correct.
Mr. Fox, if you're prepared to address that.
Mr. Moderator, if I understand the question, if this charter provision were adopted, then as it would read, the new position of town administrator would be one that would be an employee at will. And what that would mean is that one would not have to establish the concept of cause, although in the world in which we live, I would anticipate that there certainly would be litigation, and there could well be litigation based on discrimination for age, race, religion, or things of that nature. So I think in either case, whether under the system we have now or the new system, there is the potential, dependent upon the fact pattern, for there to be a lengthy and long process for removal of an individual.
Mr. Beckwith, did you have any follow-up?
Would there be, in your judgment, any difference in litigation, or are the two essentially the same? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Fox, he's asking, is there any difference with respect to the employment status of this individual if we were to adopt the proposed amendment?
Without attempting to avoid the question, the difficulty with it is that in either case, I would anticipate the potential, as this town has seen in the past, for litigation to be instituted for one reason or another. So in either case, I would anticipate it would be a lengthy and litigious process.
All right. Mr. Curtis, to be followed by Joseph Calico of District 11.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just have one comment. Ms. Lockton mentioned two things when she spoke earlier. One of them was the word shall is used, and that this makes this a mandated position. Well, go back and read the amendment itself, and what you realize is that the removal of the person requires a recommendation of the first selectman, The hiring of a new person requires the recommendation of the first selectman, and therefore would need another selectman to vote with them in both cases. So what happens if someone is removed and the board cannot agree on a replacement? We have a funded position that's written into our charter that could very well remain empty. There's no reason for this to be in the charter. Mr. Gomo has done an admirable job. Without it, I don't see any reason to codify it. And my second point, Ms. Lockton brought up, was the town of Darien. Go back and read their town charter. Their town administrator is appointed basically by their Board of Selectmen. However, their town charter has 3 mechanisms to remove that person, one of which only requires 200 signatures of the electorate. That will bring it to a public hearing. We have no such mechanism to remove an RTM member, never mind our town administrator or first selectman or anyone else. So keep in mind that most of the communities that I read had methods in their charters to, other than the Board of Selectmen, to take that position out or to have the current occupant of that position removed, or at least, in the case of town of Darien, brought to a public hearing. I think at minimum for someone at that level of position, we need a mechanism that has citizen input somewhere. And right now the amendment doesn't have that. Thank you.
Mr. Calico, to be followed by Karen Sotacon of District 6.
Mr. Moderator, members, Joe Calico, District 11. I want to say that I'm not opposed to a town administrator position, but I just don't think we need it codified, and I just want to take a few seconds to say that I have worked with Mr. Gomo. I've always found him courteous, accessible. He's helped solve problems, and he's a gentleman, so Ed, I thank you for that. But I want to go beyond now and talk briefly about the proposed charter change. I see 3 warning signs based on everything I've heard here tonight and what I've read. Number 1, just look at the committee votes. They're so laid out with negativism that it should give us great pause, specifically with respect to a charter change. Number 2, I want to report an exchange I observed at the town services joint meeting last Tuesday night. One of the members, Mr. Van Kaiserling, asked more than once, where does the buck stop with respect to the town administrator's position if people are unhappy? I don't view him as having received a straight answer. In fact, he was admonished more than once to go read the amendment, and that was the answer. I did read the amendment, and I read the explanos. It talks about the day-to-day supervision and control, but it also talks about, in the explanos, Board of Selectmen to appoint and remove, and yet Section A doesn't say the Board of Selectmen appoint and remove. They shall appoint based on the recommendation of the first selectman, and they may remove, but again, the trigger is the first selectman. So I have to ask why the discrepancy between the language and the explanos, and in view of the response I heard at the town services meeting, I have to say I was disappointed and would vote no. So this is what made me stop and think. These are the warning signs, and I ask all of you to stop and think. And when it comes to a charter change, if you have any doubt, vote no.
Karen Sotacon, to be followed by Christine Edwards, District 8.
Good evening again. I would like to speak as an individual member of the RTM. The proposal to have a more formalized town administrator is not a new concept. It is not credited only to Jim Lash. As we have learned, there's a history of it, including former First Selectman Bergstrasser's support. However, it is Jim Lash who has for 3 years proven how essential this professional position is to effective town government in Greenwich. What bothers me about the opposition to the proposal is the reasoning. Because Ed Gomo, the current town administrator, has done such a stunning job, the opposition says it's a bad idea to have him. Some say he's so unique, he sets a bar that cannot be reached again. In fact, he sets a standard by laying the groundwork for this position to become a permanent one in Greenwich. He is not the only town administrator in existence. I have heard that apparently there are at least 7,000 such positions in the United States. I like Ed too, but the facts show that many towns have Ed Gomos. Greenwich will find more Ed Gomos, especially with the addition of this job to the charter so that it will be attracting a professional candidate to a permanent job. While a town administrator is supposed to provide transition and survive from selectman to selectman, the opposition says, no, it's just a political appointment. Any new selectman coming into office should welcome the opportunity to have a seasoned town administrator to aid him or her in taking over the job of selectman. As we know from experience, selectmen come from varied backgrounds and don't all have the same experience in town government. Why would anyone oppose the idea of having more continuity in administrating the daily business of Greenwich? As I've said at a previous time in this body, in these meetings, you can liken a town administrator to an executive director in a nonprofit. Boards come and go, executive directors stay, and they are sure that the business of the organization stays on course. As for the argument that it adds more employees and expense to town government, the fact is that 17 to 18 positions have been eliminated since Jim Lash took office, with over $1 million returned to the general fund. Furthermore, the focus should be on how effective and efficient money is used. I think we get a lot of bang for our buck with our current town administrator. The hours that the job entails is tremendous. I would think that the existence of a town administrator must save other employee man-hours by the mere fact that the town administrator streamlines the channels of communication and business that is conducted between town employees, residents, etc., and the Board of Selectmen. Finally, it's a terrible cop-out to say that Ed Gomo is great and he isn't in the town charter. The point is that Greenwich has finally had the experience of a professional town administrator. Why go backwards? Why not take one more step forward and guarantee that future leaders of Greenwich will provide the same level of professionalism to the issues and to the constituents of our town by including the position in the town charter and guaranteeing another experienced professional town administrator? Thank you.
Christine Edwards, to be followed by Mary Ferry of District 5.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say how wonderful it is in the government that we have today that the people who live in town can speak before other people living in town, paying our taxes, and this is really where government starts. We come here together, we talk together. I really was very happy to hear Todd say, Todd Ladonia, that really the population hasn't changed all that much in the 35 years that he's been here. The other thing that I think in terms of our change, we certainly haven't had the town grow any larger. It's still the 50 square miles or so. But we have a government that allows us to speak, to have certain boards that are independent, and I really like the way that the government is laid out with the checks and balances. We're here tonight that we have a really big budget, but I'd like to bring everyone's attention to one thing that's not been said tonight. About half of this budget is Board of Education. So we take that aside. That's $150 million now that we're looking at. And in that we have Department of Public Works and other independent, there are other boards that are independent as well that I like to see be independent. We also have a tremendous resource here in the town of Greenwich, which are tremendously solid individuals who have business backgrounds, who donate their time thoughtfully and very creatively to the various boards, whether it's a Board of Education, whether it's a budget oversight, whether it's legal, all the different boards we have tremendous broad spectrum of knowledge. And that's a very unique quality that we have. So we have people here who are running major, major corporations with budgets in the billions, not just budgets in the millions, and they're bringing their expertise to us. I'm speaking specifically tonight about things I've spoken about in the past, which is you don't just make a charter change for the sake of making a charter change. We have to really be extremely thoughtful when we come to change the government, which I feel works very well for us in this town. If we want to change how we rule the government, then we should, as Stanford had, set up a charter change committee Spend a few years bringing that up, perhaps, and very, very thoughtful in how we restructure the government if we don't feel that the, I'm trying to think how many years, 400-plus years?
30 seconds.
Has been able to bring us forward. If we need to really restructure this government, let's do it thoughtfully and not just on a willy-nilly charter change here and there. Really have a scope of practice of what we want to look at if we want to change the charter here in a broad sense, not just as little things come up, and take all the expertise that we have in this room and in this town to do it in a long perspective that will stand for another 400 years. And I thank you.
Mary Ferry, to be followed by Bob Stone of the BET.
Good evening. Again, I was a member of the League of Women Voters, interviewed all but one of the living former first selectmen. The majority of them told us that they did not have time to adequately supervise the town departments under their control because they had so many other duties to perform. Since the time of those interviews, RTM has given the first selectman significantly more responsibilities. These include long-range planning, coordination of the budget for all departments, and oversight of operational plans. First selectmen, who generally have no experience administering town departments, come and go, sometimes every 2 years. Having a professional to bridge the gap will create continuity and keep the departments from becoming fiefdoms, and may eventually save money for the town, or may actually save money for the town. The proposed charter language establishes clear lines of authority for the first selectman, the town administrator, and the board of selectmen. If the position is not in the charter, lines of authority are not quite so clear. The charter language also clarifies the responsibilities of the town administrator under the control of the first selectman. The buck stops with the first selectman. If the town administrator should become a de facto power broker, he or she can be dismissed under the at-will clause. There is no position in town which can be removed by RTM or the public, as suggested by previous speakers. I plan to vote for this amendment, and I hope that you will also.
Bob Stone, to be followed by Jim Boutel, who would be the last of the speakers who signed up.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, members of the town meeting, and guests, I admit to a certain hesitancy toward getting involved in an issue about which this body, in which I was proud to serve, is quite capable of deliberating. But I decided to speak tonight because I might just have a different perspective concerning the proposal. We've heard about changes to the job description, clarifying ultimate responsibility. Fine, but not the issue. The question really is, does the position promise increased efficiencies? Will it be part of a solution or alternatively part of a problem? In theory, it provides the equivalent of a corporate chief operating officer. Pretty enticing. Greenwich would have someone as a go-to individual should the first selectman ever be out of town, and to quote, bridge administrations. In practice, the position is clearly an extension of the first selectman, who was voted into office, and despite the allure of the administrator being objective and highly professional, he will be a legacy eventually of a first selectman who is no longer in office for better or worse. Do we really want to go down that path after a single trial period? Now let's look at, and I'm just limiting it because of time, an example of the record. While the incumbent is a nice guy and was a very capable controller, an honest assessment of results during this trial period offers still additional reason to hesitate. Several months ago, the Audit Committee began a review of the town's purchasing process and of several awards that had drawn attention. Our efforts were to determine if changes should be made to better protect the town's interests concerning that activity, which, as you know, leads to significant expenditures. Not so obvious, it also indirectly involves potential exposure to sizable penalties stemming from litigation emanating from services by contractors. We asked the purchasing director to meet with us, and the meeting was scheduled. Incomprehensibly, given the importance of the subject, the administrator played a role in the purchasing director's reversal of her own decision to appear before the committee, thereby hindering progress. Is this part of the solution? You'll determine if such a solution is to be woven into the administrative fabric of this town. Thanks for your attention.
Mr. Boutelle of District 8, to be followed by Nick Edwards of District 8.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, I'm not going to repeat anything that's been said earlier. I just want to address a couple of the concerns that have been expressed by those apparently opposed to the charter change. One, it talks about it being less democratic. I just want to remind this body, let's talk about the last time we made a significant change in town through a charter change. We, as a body, decided to recommend to the voters, and they overwhelmingly approved the concept of going to a professional assessor. We had long debates in this body about, shouldn't it be somebody who has to live locally and therefore can get elected? We, in fact, as a body, decided it is more important to have a professional in that job than it is to have a democratically elected individual in that job. Now, let me say, I agree with those who say we need more debate. We need to talk about where we're going with town government. But I find that contrary to votes. This is one of the few times I actually voted against the motion to limit debate. How can you be in favor of more debate and move to limit it? One of the big advantages of moving this item forward tonight is we don't amend the charter tonight. We don't have that authority. This goes to the voters. The voters will decide this in the fall. This coming fall is a municipal election year. It would be my hope that the candidates, whether it be the incumbent running for re-election, and I don't know anything, or two new candidates running, would debate this issue. Let me address one final point, that the argument that it's going to become the go-to guy. We have two, I mentioned this in the Greenwich Time, we have two very highly qualified go-to gals in the First Selectman's office. Paula and Charlene are the people you need to see when you need to get something done. On the other hand, they have not taken over the town of Greenwich. And if I can just ask for one more favor from this body, can we please stop comparing ourselves to Darien? Can't we pick a higher example? Thank you.
Nick Edwards, to be followed by Joan Caldwell of District 10.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and my fellow delegates. I rise to ask that you do not approve this. There are very serious issues about codifying it. And I'd just like to point out something interesting as far as what we have now. Mr. Gomo is deeply appreciated, seen as very competent. Now here's where I have a hard time with what we have now, and this is not even in the charter. Mr. Lash has pointed out to the independent boards like Department of Social Services that they are to initiate action according to their independent nature and to determine the needs of the Department of Social Services. So they reviewed their staffing needs and come up with positions that need to be filled. Over the last at least 2 years, they've instructed the acting Commissioner of Social Services to go fill those. Well, in good faith, conversations were held with the Human Resources Department and at times with Mr. Gomo, and lo and behold, what we find is not as we voted recently for the Human Resources Department to assist independent boards
there was a brick wall. You can't fill those positions because, well, there's a freeze, a hiring freeze. Well, there wasn't a hiring freeze. There's only a hiring freeze for new positions. So here's a budget that was approved by us, and this independent board is trying to fill them, and yet it's stonewalled. So then I asked Mr. Lash, I said, well, how come it's being frozen? You know, how come they're not able to fulfill their requirements under the charter with filling the needs that they have determined are appropriate? Well, he says, well, I control this. Well, you control the departments that you do under the charter, but one of the concerns I have is the integrity of really honoring the charter. If an independent board says they have these needs, then why aren't they fulfilled? The Human Resource Department was to assist in the fulfillment of this. Then a conversation was had with Mr. Gomo. Well, I want you to defend why you want to fill these positions.
30 seconds.
And that's part of the issue. Here we have a non-codified situation with problems that are basically at an impasse. How do we do this if we're codified?
Joan Caldwell, District 10.
Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting, I was much relieved when Mr. Beckwith raised the point of whether or not the town attorney felt that someone as town administrator would be easier dismissed under a charter assignment as opposed to being in the Greenwich Pay Plan, which is where he is now. I must confess that I was a little disappointed, not in the answer because I think it was very truthful, but in the way he presented it to you. And it reminded me of something my father said to me many years ago. Never ask a lawyer if you want to do something. The fact of the matter is that Mr. Fox is absolutely correct. We are in a litigious society. And if someone were dismissed, regardless of whether that someone was under the charter or in the charter, or simply a member of the Greenwich Pay Plan, which is the situation now, they might bring an action against the town for any number of reasons. But the most likely reason would be that the town pay plan says that a person may be dismissed only for cause. And cause, ladies and gentlemen, means you've got to keep track of what's going on. You have to build a file. You don't just wake up one morning with whimsy and say, I don't want this person here anymore. And we don't have such files. We've never kept such files, and I doubt that we ever will. So therefore, on our management positions, and you know that we've had a problem. Remember the former controller? In situations like that, you need language which is very clear, so it makes it a little less likely that a judge is going to rule in favor of the former employee. For that reason, moving this job into the charter makes sense. It is one of several reasons that need to be thought about very clearly, and I agree with Mr. Boutel. We're only sending this the next step. The final decision is going to rest with the voters, and I think they have the right to expect good continuity, intelligent, experienced, educated management from a town administrator or a first selectman. And since we change first selectmen every 2, 4, and occasionally every 10 years, it's a good idea to have someone in there running the show with a more hands-on experience from day to day. And please don't underestimate the importance of having us take this position out from under the for-cause dismissal provision of the Greenwich Pay Plan. Thank you.
Further discussion on item 2. Mr. Brogan, District 2. Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded to cut off debate. The motion for the previous question is not debatable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. We have gone through all those who signed up and have taken additional speakers. so I will call for the vote. If you are in favor of cutting off debate at this point and proceeding to vote, you should vote in favor of Mr. Brogan's motion for the previous question. If you would like to consider additional discussion, you should vote no. All those in favor of the motion for the previous question, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. Now, let me just make one thing clear. It's true that our call does not reflect what is required for passage of this particular charter amendment. In order to pass, because it is a proposed amendment of our charter, it requires a majority vote of the entire membership of the RTM. That means it requires 115 affirmative votes. Any vote to abstain on this is essentially the same as a no vote. Anyone who is absent essentially is voting no as well. And if this does receive a majority vote of the membership, it will then go to a referendum next November. So will the district chairs please mark your voting cards. Item number 2, as amended, and proceed to poll your delegation. While we are voting, we will take up the last item on our agenda, which is item number 7. Do we have someone to present item number 7, which is a proposed ordinance regarding the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency? Is there anyone to present item number 7 to us? Mr. Bloomer, would you care to do the honors? Thank you. Franklin Bloomer, Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Item number 7, resolved that the following ordinance establishing a municipal fine for inland wetlands violations be approved. And the balance of the resolution, which is the proposed ordinance, is as it is in the call.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 7 has been moved and seconded. We will take up the committee reports on this, beginning with Mr. Bloomer and the Land Use Committee.
The Land Use Committee considered this item at our meeting last Monday evening. I'm going to give you the vote, and then I'm going to defer to the Legislative and Rules Committee. Our vote was 12 in favor, none opposed, with no abstentions. We actually had 2 votes. We had a couple of proposed amendments, and then we voted on the ordinance as amended. I have a fuller report to give, but I propose not to give it at this time, Mr. Moderator, because I understand the Legislative and Rules Committee is going to make a motion to refer the item to itself for some amendments that they would like to see made. If that amendment is not passed here this evening, then, with your permission, I'd like to give a fuller report.
Absolutely. Thank you. Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, our committee was not referred this matter, but we chose to take it up by vote of our committee. As Legislative and Rules Committee, and this is an ordinance, we thought that it would be appropriate that we review it. We heard from Attorney Wayne Fox, who says that the town has the legal right to promulgate this ordinance by virtue of the enabling legislation, which appears at Connecticut General Statute, Section 22A42. This enabling statute allows the town to establish procedures which are similar in nature to the citation procedures for parking violation. This ordinance, if passed by us, will permit Wetlands Agency to adopt procedures by which the fines may be imposed and to set the amount of the fine subject to only the $1,000 limits established by state statute. Our committee had many concerns about this item, not the least of which was that the attorney in the law department primarily responsible for its drafting was unavailable to us. Mr. Wetmore had intended to appear before our committee but was unable to do so. We also did not have anyone from Wetlands address our concerns. This is not their fault. They didn't know that we were going to be taking it up, and I wasn't able to get in touch with them in time to have them before our committee. Our committee took up a motion by Mr. Bergweger of District 8 to ask that the RTM refer this matter back to Legislative and Rules Committee so that we can meet with the representative from Wetlands and from Mr. Wetmore to better understand exactly how this ordinance would be put into effect. Our vote on the referral was 10 in favor with 2 abstentions.
Thank you. Would you like to make that motion now?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I move on behalf of the committee that this matter be referred back to our committee for further consideration and to bring it back to the RTM at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Because that is a motion offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. Discussion on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to refer item 7 back to the Legislative and Rules Committee. All right, this is a procedural issue, so I will call for a voice vote. If you are in favor of referring this back to Legislative and Rules, you should vote in favor. If you would like to continue discussing this tonight, you should vote no. All those in favor of the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to refer item 7, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. So that is the final item to come before us. Now, let me just explain one thing about the vote on item 2, which we are currently in the process of tabulating. From term to term, the total number of RTM members varies between 229 members and 230, depending on how the clerk's office breaks down the number of delegates in each district. This current term, we only have a total of 229 members, so a majority is 115 votes. Okay, if we had 230 members, a majority would be 116, but it's 115 this term. Mr. Bloomer.
Just a question. There may be some vacancies. I don't know whether there are or not, but if there are vacancies, would that bring the number down?
No. The question was, if there are vacancies among those 229 seats, does that affect the total? And Mr. Fox, I believe we've gone over that before. The answer is no. All right, so we are awaiting the results of the vote. Any districts still counting their individual votes, I ask that you expedite that. We have the result of the vote on item number 2, the proposed charter amendment on the town administrator position. Those in favor, 91. Opposed, 97. Abstaining, 4. That item has failed. There being no further business to come before the meeting, and absent objection, the meeting is now adjourned. I wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Have a safe trip home.